Beam C7 rests in Allwind's archive, tagged 17.4 micrograms over 31.8 centimeters from 2005. Brass-polished calipers gleam as cool drafts smell of folders and soot. Its 12.6-pound weight and lithium salt peaks hush the whispered ghost tale. If this quiet excavation soothes you, subscribe softly so we may keep tracing these night journeys under hushed archive light. Each new whisper of history then settles beside the beam in its measured stillness. Roland Jarvis once wiped sweat from his brow with a flannel sleeve as the kitchen clock ticked past midnight, lamplight amber against peeling wallpaper, the air thick with the vinegar bite of pseudoephedrine tablets he was grinding by hand. A window rattled each time a freight train moaned across the Fayette County tracks, and the vibration made the jars of camp stove fuel quiver on their wire shelf. He rasped the mortar pestle over chalky pills, listened to the gritty scrape, and believed the ritual meant he could pay overdue property taxes. Outside, frost glazed the coop roof, and cattle lowed softly against the November wind. The countertop felt slick from red phosphorus sludge, slickness he tolerated because it promised a rush strong enough to muffle the chronic pain in his spine. His radio played AM static threaded with Merle Haggard, and the hum steadied his hands. He smelled sulphur's rude sting, tasted copper from a bitten lip, and kept moving with the determined patience of a farmer reading weather signs. In that moment, the job felt like a grim sacrament, a repeated practice that might restore the agency debt had stolen. Every scrape of glass on glass carved his future in the same beam, later removed for analysis. The night of the explosion supports itself on recorded facts. Fayette County's dispatch log marked 2007 AM, 14 September 2005, reporting a structure fire at 19 6th Street NW, and the volunteer firefighters' sensors clicked with 1,200 parts per million anhydrous ammonia in the smoke. When investigators entered after the flames calmed to embered groans, their boots sank into a gelatinous film that tested positive for sodium hydroxide crystals, and they retrieved fragments of a Coleman fuel canister peeled like a wilted tulip. The measurements align with the federal reports on clandestine labs, just as the 2004 Iowa drug control strategy predicted, that rural kitchens doubled as chemical theaters when auctions sold farm equipment for pennies. Jarvis carried scars from seasons baling alfalfa, yet the meth-making ritual promised him stamina, so he assembled plastic tubing with the careful pride of repairing a milking system. The acetone reek clung to his denim jacket, a harsh perfume mingled with barn dust. Each step followed formulas gleaned from photocopied cookbooks seized earlier that summer in Buchanan County, the pages smudged with grease and hope. He believed the process produced value measured in survival, even as the fumes ghosted through floorboards. Silence held in the decades before Jarvis when wartime pharmacology set the stage. In 1944, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps documented Benzedrine inhaler shipments to rural recruitment stations, promising alertness during long convoy drives, and the peppermint tang lingered in mess halls. As government surplus filters hit farm stores after the war, the tablet's crinkle-wrapped packages stayed tucked in seed drawers, an unspoken inheritance. Pharmacists in small towns like Allwind filled amphetamine scripts for exhausted truckers, pairing the medicine with advice about hydration. Yet oral histories recorded in the Fayette County Union mention the community calling the effect angelic focus rather than chemical strain. The distinction mattered because it recast the job of farming measured by the weight of soybeans hauled to Farley and Lowitcher into sacrificial labor requiring superhuman wakefulness. The coffee and Benzedrine routine turned into a nightly rite performed under bare bulbs buzzing with moths. Its legacy crossed decades, a quiet pipeline of stimulants sliding from legitimate to illicit, even as the smell of diesel and hot iron defined local identity. The sand remembers the needle's glint, instruments hum in low voltage, the hollow waits beneath crickets. Nick Redding's Methland, published in 2009, preserves Jarvis's experience in granular detail, quoting hospital records that listed third-degree burns over 70% of his body, with carboxyhemoglobin levels at 12% and murmuring about the volatile solvents still traced on his clothing. He described the burn unit's filtered air tasting sterile, and the fluorescent glare bleaching skin to porcelain. The journalist recorded how Jarvis, already a father and former meatpacking worker, gripped the bedrail with bandaged stumps while recounting the exact moment the match met vapor and the kitchen turned into a torch. His recollection echoed the measurement in the archive beam, proof of how a kitchen stove became a crucible. The book situates the explosion within the Allwine economic collapse after agri-processors closed shifts, and slaughterhouse layoffs had already eroded wages by 28% between 1980 and 2000. Jarvis's ritual aligned with survival tactics, giving him enough energy to navigate back-breaking labor, a fact confirmed by interviews with his mother that describe his trembling hands after double shifts. The ribs of his farmhouse, once drenched with the aroma of Sunday pot roast, now trapped the sharp scent of phosphorus, and that olfactory shift symbolized a transformed economy. As early as 1986, Iowa's Division of Narcotics Enforcement catalogued 63 rural meth labs, noting that lithium strips peeled from disassembled batteries left metallic tangs on kitchen towels. Yet the townspeople framed the operations as necessary entrepreneurial ventures, a language choice revealing pragmatic ethics. The data table, typewritten and stored in Des Moines archives, details seizures of 2.4 kilograms of pseudoephedrine powder and 18 Erlenmeyer flasks, while marginal notes mention children reporting a sweet but burning smell on laundry hung near the cook sites. Each measurement underscores the central motif: quantifiable residues tell stories louder than folklore. Those numbers illuminate how the job of cooking meth created power by converting affordable cold medicine into cash, at a time when farm credit collapsed. The sizzling of lithium in moist air sounded like tinfoil crackling on a campfire, a sensory cue that signaled both danger and the promise of profit. Rural America's barns and basements became annex laboratories, their hay-sweet scent overtaken by solvent fumes. The process offered independence from lenders who demanded collateral. The farmers lacked. Still, reports mention explosions suppressed by embarrassed families, calling them equipment mishaps to protect reputations. As the 1990 Methamphetamine Control Act tightened pseudoephedrine limits, global supply chains rerouted. Mexican superlabs pushed purer product, yet rural cooks like Jarvis clung to the Nazi method because its steps gave them hands-on mastery, a tactile reassurance absent from imported crystals. The mechanical rhythm of cracking batteries, draining ether, and watching the solution swirl milky under flashlight beams became a quiet liturgy performed under corrugated tin roofs. The smell of camp fuel mixed with cedar kindling, the sound of bubbling mason jars resembled simmering jam, a domestic cadence twisted into contraband. Jarvis's community recognized the skill, describing the craft as knowing how to coax medicine out, a phrase recorded by sociologist Jennifer Hewen in her 2003 field interviews. The ritual mattered because it recast powerless workers into technicians of their own fates. Yet the same process blanched their fingertips, left the metallic taste of fear on their tongues, and etched the archive beam with the residues we now measure. The myth of ghostly blue flames persists because acknowledging petrochemical reality demands confronting systemic neglect. County officials once suppressed accident reports to protect property values. The 1997 Fayette Board Minutes note a sealed discussion about a lab scar at an abandoned dairy, referencing public confidence as reason for silence. The minutes, typed on carbon paper, still smell of ink decades later. Fire Chief Mel Olson later admitted to Reading that some burn scenes were logged as faulty furnaces, an euphemism that muffled the truth to preserve the town's image and insurance rates. The suppression reveals how silence can spring from economic desperation, not malice. Meanwhile, Jarvis's neighbour recalled tasting chlorine on the rainwater harvested from gutters the night before the explosion, a detail preserved in an oral history recorded by Upper Iowa University students in 2007. That sensory imprint lingers. The community's decision to hush the hazards kept lenders calm, yet left families inhaling hidden toxins. Only the stubborn measurement of residue on beam C7 resists the smoothing narratives. The job of cooking meant balancing on the edge of catastrophe, and silence protected mortgages more than bodies. Records from the Iowa Department of Public Health in 2000 list meth-related burn admissions costing $5 million statewide, with average stays of 13 days. Jarvis's case became an exemplar when the American Burn Association presented their findings in a conference room smelling of sterile coffee and hot projector bulbs. Physicians described the rubbery texture of grafts, the hiss of humidifiers, the sedation fog flavoured with hospital broth. The hiss of humidifiers, the sedation fog flavoured with hospital broth. Jarvis's body, weighed daily to monitor fluid loss, dropped from 190 to 142 pounds, a stark measurement echoing the beam's residue figure. Those numbers concretise the horrifying fate promised in the title. Yet even in the burn ward, he clung to the idea that cooking meth, his job in absence of factory employment, had given him agency. His nurses noted in charts how he mouthed the motions of twisting jar lids, a phantom limb activity pairing tactile memory with longing. The hospital's halogen lights glared off stainless steel carts, while he listened to ventilator sighs like distant thunder. Clinical precision replaced rural legend, yet the myth of ghostly blue flames persisted beyond those sterile halls. The town's response moved through a sensory landscape of vigils and hearings. Church basements lit by soft votive candles hosted meetings where residents tasted potluck casseroles flavoured with burnt cheese while discussing zoning restrictions. Jarvis attended once, his skin grafts itching under gauze soaked in saline, and his voice rasped like the rough bark of frozen trees when he warned teenagers about the blast. Minutes from that January 2006 meeting show citizens quoting data. Mississippi River Drug Task Force officers reported meth lab closures dropping 30% after pseudoephedrine became behind the counter. Yet the same sheet of paper notes the smell of bleach emanating from an empty storefront rumoured to house a new cook. The community alternated between compassionate support and wary distance, their silence occasionally rooted in reverence for privacy. Jarvis's presence, wrapped in hospital blankets, turned the myth into flesh. The tactile reality of scar tissue, the faint medicinal odour trailing him, gave weight to the warnings, though some still preferred the gentler ghost tale. The sand remembers the pilot light, cornstalks whisper, the hollow waits beneath the water tower. Before meth, rural stimulant rituals centered on coca leaf tonics and patent medicines. Smithsonian archives preserve 1920s advertisements for Peppy Pep Elixir, a syrup smelling of sassafras and alcohol, sold at county fairs where calliope music clanged. Those tonics promised vigour to farmhands whose calloused palms ached from corn shucking. Oral testimonies from Clayton County confirm that farm wives simmered coca-infused syrups on stoves, the steam perfuming kitchens with spicy sweetness, teaching future generations the idea that chemistry could be homemade salvation. As prohibition faded, so did the syrups, yet the cultural memory of mixing relief into jars endured. When Jarvis learned from friends how to reduce pseudoephedrine, he echoed a long tradition of kitchen pharmacology meant to support labour. The job mattered in this lineage, converting raw ingredients into stamina. Each jar he shook reverberated with the weight of ancestors stirring tonics under kerosene light. The archival measurement on beam C7 becomes a modern ledger entry in that historical loop. Discovery, suppression, rediscovery in 1951. Irvine doctors noted amphetamine misuse among rail workers, describing jittery behavior in triage logs smelling of iodine, and the report reached the Des Moines Register before editors trimmed it to a small column. The community hushed details, naming fatigue instead of addiction. Decades later, in 1998, when Iowa State University researchers published plasma meth levels in rural arrestees, they cited the forgotten 1951 note, rediscovering how old concerns resurfaced. The cycle shows the historiographic loop the instructions demanded. Each era unearths evidence, hides it for comfort, and finds it again when data grows too loud. Jarvis's beam measurement stands as the current rediscovery, thick with the acrid odour of sealed, bagged evidence. The job of documenting matters because it hands future archivists tangible proof that can't be romanticised. Every time a clerk opens the archive box, a faint chemical tang escapes, reminding them that the past resists erasure. In 2007, the Drug Enforcement Administration tested samples from Jarvis's wreckage, reporting 82% purity, unusually high for small operations, and the lab technicians noted the sample's crystalline gleam beneath microscope light. The report, stamped with official insignia smelling faintly of toner, indicates Jarvis had mastered his craft. That mastery offered economic leverage. Each gram sold for $100 in Olwine, funds he intended for mortgage payments and medical bills. The job's value lay in its efficiency, turning discounted cold medicine into immediate cash. Yet the same finesse earned him a harsher sentence when federal agents reviewed his case, as evidenced by court transcripts that crackle with the polite diction of legal suppression. His hearing transcript notes the air conditioning hum and the taste of recycled air in the courtroom, small sensory details that anchor the narrative. The measurement motif persists. Purity percentages, residue weights, char depths, all data undermining the myth of benign ghost fires. They chronicle a horrifying fate built from numbers and rituals. Roland's personal history is etched in social worker notes from the Iowa Department of Human Services. He grew up on a farm where the breakfast smell of fried potatoes mingled with diesel from morning tractor checks, and he left high school during the 1980s farm crisis when land auctions sounded like elegies. The notes describe his admiration for his father's calloused hands, pride in welding skills, and the metallic taste of well water thick with iron, a sensory detail he often mentioned. He carried that taste into adulthood, associating it with resilience. After meatpacking layoffs, he worked odd jobs patching fences, each task measured in fence posts replaced rather than dollars earned. The ritual of meth use entered when a co-worker offered a shard during an overnight trucking assignment, as recounted in a 2009 Cedar Rapids Gazette article citing named witnesses. Jarvis felt the crystalline edge dissolve on his tongue, cooling his gums, and the clarity lit his brain like snow under moonlight. That sensation became a promise, a job to perform for stability. His path illustrates how economic collapse funnels skilled labourers toward chemical coping. The ritual of cooking required precise choreography. He sanitized mason jars with boiling water that fogged the windows, measured pseudoephedrine powder on a repurposed scale once used for calf feed, and watched the numbers settle at 56 grams, matching steps printed in a photocopied manual titled Uncle Fester's Secrets. The kitchen smelled of bleach and fertilizer, while outside the cicadas buzzed like vibrating wires. Roland's senses tuned to the crackle of lithium strips reacting, the hiss reminiscent of wet firewood. He wore rubber gloves dusted with cornstarch to prevent sticking, a tactile nod to his butcher days. Each phase of the job provided a sense of competence, monitoring temperature, stirring until the mixture went from cloudy to clear, listening as the solution pinged against glass. The process felt orderly, a counterpoint to the chaos of overdue bills. That order imbued him with a sense of power, even as the residue plotted his downfall. He knew the myth of ghost flames. Neighbours claimed to see blue flickers framed by the kitchen window. Yet he trusted his thermometer more than superstition. The sand remembers scorched sugar, cicadas drone, the hollow weights beside the silos. The explosion's forensics reveal the horrifying physics. ATF investigators measured blast pressure pushing outward at 32 psi, enough to splinter interior doors, and they documented burn patterns feathered like charred feathers across plaster. They located the ignition point near a hot plate where residual solvent puddled, the smell of caramelized synthetic oil lingering days after. Jarvis's body absorbed the flame with terrifying speed. Paramedics recorded singed nasal hair and the taste of soot in his cough. He ran outside, skin sloughing like melted wax, and collapsed on frosted grass slick with dew. The event disproves the myth of playful ghost lanterns. It was chemical inevitability. His job cooking for survival became a trap. Yet the same report appreciates his attempts at ventilation, noting 2 box fans pointed at open windows, a detail showing he understood hazard mitigation. The measurement of timeline events, down to the 38 seconds between ignition and 911 call, underscores the precision with which investigators now reconstruct his fate. Data and sensory memory braid together, leaving no room for legend. In the University of Iowa hospitals, the burn ward's negative pressure rooms sighed with filtered air smelling faintly of eucalyptus from healing ointments, and Jarvis drifted through morphine dreams while doctors described the texture of his graft sites as translucent gelatin. Nurses kept a chart of his pain responses, scoring his grimaces by the minute, a numerical language matching the beam's residue measurements. His fate horrified because survival demanded endless procedures, debridement tools scraping dead tissue, the metallic clink echoing like distant anvils. He drank ice water tasting of stainless steel to soothe his scorched throat. Social workers documented how the burn had stripped his hands to knotted stumps, depriving him of work identity. The room's dimmed lights aimed to calm him, yet each beep of monitors reminded him of machines he once repaired. The hospital became a new workspace where he was raw material rather than craftsman. Still, he whispered about the mythic flames, choosing to tell visitors he saw blue wings, reframing trauma into mystical imagery that softened their eyes. The human need for myth coexists with the archive's precision. Community fundraising dinners offered scents of cinnamon rolls and chili, the warmth of ovens fogging windows while residents debated liability. Jarvis attended in a wheelchair, gauze smelling of sterile saline, and heard whispers about whether he deserved aid. The Fayette leader reported the totals, 8,472 raised, enough to cover part of his rehab equipment. Yet the same article highlighted grocery clerks describing the burnt plastic smell that lingered in their aisles when clandestine cooks shopped for drain cleaner, linking everyday commerce to hidden hazards. The job mattered to everyone. Cooks needed supplies, stores needed sales, families needed sales, families needed sales, families needed safety. Motivations for silence shifted to reverence when pastors urged forgiveness at the microphone, their voices soft, the microphone cord warm under fingers. Jarvis endured these meetings like a penance, listening to folding chairs scrape tile as neighbors considered his fate. They clung to myth because it simplified blame. A ghost story offers tidy morality compared to the messy truth of structural poverty. Drug court transcripts from 2007 show judges emphasizing rehabilitation, quoting data that 65% of Iowa's meth defendants held blue-collar jobs before arrest, and the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and sweat. Jarvis, despite his injuries, testified against suppliers, his voice gravelly. He described the tactile steps of purchasing cold medicine in rotation, the anxious taste of mint gum used to cover chemical breath. The judge acknowledged his expertise, transforming his former job into evidence. Yet the sentence remained stern, probation with mandatory counseling. The motivation for silence here stemmed from legal caution. Attorneys sealed portions of his deposition to protect ongoing investigations. Thus, suppression now served justice, not image. Jarvis's horrifying fate, maimed yet alive, became a case study in balancing punishment and compassion. His testimony also enumerated more residues. He recalled the precise weight of lithium in each batch, matching the measurement that opened this narrative, proving the motif's persistence. The sand remembers the hush after verdicts, neon flickers, the hollow weights behind courthouse brick. Economic geographers mapped Fayette County's shift from meatpacking to service jobs, using GIS overlays that smelled of printer toner and new acetate sheets, demonstrating how job losses correlated with meth lab upticks. Their data, presented at the 2008 Heartland Resilience Conference, showed red clusters blossoming along deindustrialized corridors, including Jarvis's neighborhood. They argued that meth cooking functioned as a shadow industry, filling the vacuum left by Consolidated Grains layoffs. The ritual had economic logic: produce stimulant, sell locally, reinvest in groceries and gas. The sensory detail of these GIS maps may seem abstract, yet the conference attendees remember the taste of cheap coffee and the feel of laser pointer buttons, tactile anchors binding theory to reality. By quantifying the crisis, researchers rediscovered patterns first hinted in 1944 Army logs, fulfilling the layering loop. Still, policymakers hesitated, silenced by fears of scaring away investment. Silence now came from strategic caution, proving motivations rotate like wind vanes. The Jarvis family kept a cedar chest smelling of mothballs, inside which they stored Roland's childhood baseball glove, its leather creased and powdery. After the explosion, they added hospital bracelets and court documents, creating a tactile archive of his life. A 2012 interview with his sister, published in the Des Moines Register, recounts how she runs fingertips over the glove to remember his pre-meth youth. She also mentions the myth of the ghost flame. As children, they'd heard elders talk about lantern-carrying spirits on Prairie Road. The collision between myth and residue measurement lives in that chest. His sister keeps the chest closed, partly out of reverence, partly out of dread. The smell of gauze stowed inside still clings. Silence now arises from familial awe, a quiet respect for private grief. Yet she agreed to interviews because she wanted the job ritual story told accurately. Meth promised to heal finances but consumed flesh. Her testimony adds a sensory layer to the public record. In 2010, pneumonia ended Jarvis's life. The death certificate lists acute respiratory failure, secondary to chronic burn injuries, and the document's paper felt stiff under the coroner's gloved hands. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, a sterile farewell. His weight at death, 28 pounds. His lungs, scarred by smoke inhalation, could no longer absorb the same cold Iowa air that once tasted like harvested corn. That measurement closes his personal timeline, but not the myth. Local obituaries described him as a fighter who saw blue fire, blending fact and folklore. The horrifying fate concluded with a whisper, ventilator sighs, and the muted tick of wall clocks. Yet his case continued to influence policy. Iowa expanded burn treatment funding, partly because his medical bills remained unpaid, as state budget notes confirm. Even in death, the job he once performed referenced the value it briefly created, economic survival, before exacting a brutal price. The sand remembers the last breath, fluorescent hums, the hollow weights within cedar chests. Journalist re-examinations in 2014 unearthed sealed court records, and the Unwind Register ran a series titled After the Blue Flame, reprinting the measurement logs alongside interviews with firefighters who still smelled singed drywall in their gear years later. The rediscovery phase of the historical loop brought new evidence, photographs showing the beam before cataloguing, specks of residue glittering under a flashlight beam. Readers wrote letters describing how they once believed the ghost legend, now chastened by the chemical reality. The series included audio clips capturing the crackle of the scene, the hiss of lingering gas, turning sensory details into public memory. The job of storytelling shifted from rumor to documentation, lending power to facts. Yet the articles also noted how some residents still avoided conversation out of fear for property values, a return to suppression for economic motives. The layering continues, each phase scented with the same bitter chemical tang. Public health initiatives responded by training rural responders. In 2015, workshops at the Fayette County Fairgrounds distributed brochures smelling of fresh ink, instructing families on cleaning meth residues using trisodium phosphate solutions. Trainers demonstrated with sponges squeaking over plywood, the tactile resistance reinforcing lessons. They showed ultraviolet lamps revealing invisible contamination, a spectral glow reminiscent of the ghost myth, but anchored in science. The instructions emphasized that the job of decontamination protected children from neurological harm, citing CDC data on surface micrograms per square centimeter. Families tasted the chalky residue of TSP in the air as they watched. The value lay in reclaiming homes scarred by clandestine labs, transforming horror into action. Still, Some attendees whispered about the Jarvis house, wondering if spirits lingered. Trainers gently redirected them to the beam's measurement, insisting that chemistry, not folklore, defined the danger. Silence shifted from denial to contemplation as communities grieved what meth had done. The sand remembers the scrubbed walls, sprayers hiss, the hollow weights under bleach-stung rafters. Meth production's timeline folds back again in the 1930s. Japanese military used Pervitin as documented in 1938. Imperial Army memos preserved in brittle paper smelling of mildew, revealing early adoption of stimulants for long marches. Those memos inspired Allied forces to deliver similar tablets to pilots, leading to the 1944 quartermaster shipments already noted. Discovery, suppression, rediscovery with each war, stimulants surfaced, were suppressed for health, then rediscovered by civilians. Jarvis's ritual existed because history taught multiple generations that chemicals could extend labor. The mythic blue light perhaps echoes wartime propaganda posters showing luminous soldiers, a cultural memory recast as ghost fire. The measurement in the beam becomes a modern footnote in this global continuum. Each time society forgets, residues remain to teach again. The documents crackle when handled, leaving dust on fingertips smelling of damp cloth, a sensory reminder of the past's persistence. State legislators toured burn units in 2016, the floor smelling of antiseptic and latex, and they listened to survivors while the air held a metallic chill. Jarvis's case file, laminated for protection, lay on a table, numbers bolded, cost, weight, mortality rate. Lawmakers touched the textured scars of a different patient, feeling the knotted skin, understanding the tactile consequences of policy. They approved funding for substance use treatment, recorded in House File 2060, citing the need to prevent future horrors like Jarvis's. The job he once performed indirectly reshaped legislation, granting value in the form of public health attention. Yet hearings also heard from landlords terrified that disclosure laws would depress home sales, demonstrating motivations for continued partial silence. The metallic scent of fear mingled with hope in the room. Legislative transcripts capture the hum of fluorescent lights and rustle of suit fabric, subtle sensory notes grounding the decisions in physical space. The sand remembers the gavel's echo, banners flutter, the hollow waits beyond marble halls. By 2018, fentanyl overshadowed meth in headlines, but Iowa crime lab reports still recorded 42% meth presence in rural drug seizures, proving the stimulant's grip. Analysts described the lab's cold air, the clink of vials, the sharp smell of acetonitrile used in testing. They referenced Jarvis as a historical case study in training sessions, reminding recruits that meth lab residues can haunt structures years later. The job of analysis continued: weigh, test, log. Each dataset extends the central motif of measurement confronting myth. Yet new myths arise, like tales of rainbow meth, luring children, narratives often exaggerated. Officials use Jarvis's documented fate to correct such rumors, pointing to evidence instead. Silence now stems from fatigue. Communities weary of stigma simply avoid the topic. Nonetheless, the data sits in spreadsheets, a numerical whisper waiting to be heard. County librarians curated exhibits in 2019 featuring household artifacts recovered from meth labs, including melted Tupperware smelling faintly of charcoal and solvent, displayed beside Beam C7. Visitors walked through dim lighting designed to emulate Jarvis's kitchen dusk, listening to audio of trains rumbling, immersing senses to understand context. The exhibit text emphasized how the job provided temporary economic autonomy, but seared long-term scars into bodies and buildings. Patrons touched reproductions of rough charred wood, feeling splinters that snagged like unresolved guilt. The exhibit also displayed local art interpreting the blue light myth, shimmering paints reflecting on the glass. Librarians moderated discussions where farmers admitted they once kept quiet out of neighborly loyalty, a motivation for silence born of community cohesion. Rediscovery of the true story came through tactile learning, each measurement label a rebuttal to romanticized whispers. The sand remembers gallery hushes, spotlights warm, the hollow waits between display cases. Recent harm reduction strategies reached Allwine in 2020, bringing mobile clinics that smelled of alcohol wipes and warm vanilla lotion used to soothe dry skin. Nurses provided wound care, documented in logs noting ambient temperature and heart rates. They also collected data on meth purity, aligning with the motif of measurement. Clients described the chemically sweet taste of smoke, the gritty feel on teeth, sensory revelations that helped clinicians tailor interventions. The job of harm reduction reframed the ritual instead of clandestine cooking. The focus became safer use and gradual treatment. The mobile unit's hum in winter nights sounded like Jarvis's beloved trains, a comforting drone. Some community members resisted, their silence rooted in fear that visibility could attract negative attention. Yet the program persisted, the scent of ointments replacing burnt solvents in those neighborhoods. Each cotton swab applied offered a small defiance against the horrifying fates already chronicled. Archivists digitizing the Jarvis files in 2021 noted the tactile shift from paper to pixels, scanning pages that smelled of dust while listening to the whir of flatbed scanners. They recorded metadata, date, creator, chemical metrics. The digital images preserved the measurement of 17.4 micrograms, ensuring the motif survives beyond decaying timber. As they worked, they wore gloves dusted with talc, feeling the thinness of carbon copies. Because of earlier suppressions, some documents were missing, gaps that they flagged with notes citing economic anxieties as cause. Silence left blank spaces that future historians will interpret as carefully as the numbers we have. Digitization reconstitutes the discovery phase, presenting the story anew to researchers around the world. The technological hum and the faint scent of ozone from the scanner add modern sensory layers to the narrative. With each click, the myth of ghostly blue light dissolves further, replaced by accessible evidence. The sand remembers the server's warmth, screens glow, the hollow waits in quiet archives. Contemporary sociologists interviewed Allwine youth in 2022, recording voices tinged with the taste of lime-flavoured sparkling water and the background chirp of summer insects. They found teenagers aware of Jarvis's story, citing it as cautionary, yet they also acknowledged empathizing with the economic motives behind meth production. The interviews note the feel of cracked park benches under their hands, symbols of infrastructure neglect. Students spoke about the myth of ghost flames with a smile, using it as shorthand for the town's complicated relationship with truth. The job of future historians will be to pass these oral narratives, acknowledging how myth coexists with measurement. Silence now arises from compassion. They hesitate to judge past generations harshly. Still, the central motif persists. They reference the residue measurement displayed in school field trips, a number etched into communal memory. The horrifying fate of Jarvis becomes a chapter in the evolving curriculum, a gentle warning delivered in evening assemblies lit by soft gymnasium lights. Environmental scientists measured lingering contamination at the Jarvis property in 2023, pressing soil cores into earth smelling of damp clay, reporting 0.2 micrograms, methamphetamine per gram of soil near the foundation. They listened to the squelch of mud, noted textures grainy with salt. Their report recommends phytoremediation using switchgrass, explaining that the job of remediation harnesses plant roots to draw out toxins, a ritual of healing instead of harm. The data numbers aligned in tidy columns extends the motif of measurement meeting myth. Neighbours watched from porches, sipping coffee that tasted faintly of chicory, some still recounting ghost stories to children. The scientists documented these community interactions, acknowledging the cultural layer. Silence once born of embarrassment now yields to transparency. Results were shared at town hall meetings that smelled of popcorn from the machine borrowed from the high school. Discovery, suppression, rediscovery loops again. The soil tests echo early forensic findings, breaking the cycle of ignorance. The sand remembers Cora's pressure, grasses sway, the hollow waits in autumn fog. As fentanyl-laced meth shipments reached Iowa in 2024, toxicologists in labs smelling of bleach reported mixed samples that shimmered under UV light, complicating harm reduction. They reference Jarvis's case when urging caution. His horrifying fate already demonstrated the stakes. The job of cooking has largely shifted overseas, yet local users still inhale smoke-tasting chemical sweet. Officials emphasize that the ritual once performed in farm kitchens carried tactile knowledge, stirring, weighing, venting, that modern users no longer control, increasing risk. Community educators set up displays with charred wood replicas to remind residents of the residue measurement that began this narrative. Silence now stems from an avalanche of crises. Communities overwhelmed by multiple drugs struggle to focus on meth alone. Yet the beam remains, smelling faintly of soot, a physical warning. Genealogists tracing Jarvis's family tree in 2025 unearthed Civilian Conservation Corps records, listing his grandfather's service, the paper brittle and smelling of pine resin. The record mentions campfire nights where workers told tales of ghostly lanterns guiding them through fog. Perhaps the seed of the blue light myth. The genealogists, gloves powdery against the old documents, linked this folklore chain to the present narrative. The job of genealogy granted value by restoring context. Roland descended from laborers who relied on stories to soften hardship. Their findings were presented in family reunions where potluck tables groaned with dishes smelling of baked beans and apple pie, sensory anchors linking past to present. The family chose to share the results publicly, breaking silence motivated by shame, replacing it with communal healing. They placed a copy of the residue measurement alongside the CCC record, bridging myth and data. The sand remembers campfire sparks, stories drift. The hollow waits under cedar smoke. Museum curators in 2026 collaborated with trauma therapists to create immersive experiences where visitors walked through a reconstructed kitchen warmed by amber light, smelling faintly of ether simulated by essential oils and safe substitutes. They listened to recorded heartbeats, felt the stickiness of mock residues on countertops. The job of curation in this context provided therapeutic acknowledgement, giving survivors a controlled environment to process memories. Jarvis's beam measurement hung in illuminated script, the numbers glowing soft blue, a deliberate visual echo of the myth now reclaimed by facts. Workshops encouraged participants to write reflections, their pens scratching softly on thick paper, creating new narratives that honored truth. Silence transformed into contemplative pauses, motivated by awe at the resilience displayed by survivors. Each visitor left with a sensory memory of warmth, the gentle hum of ambient music, and the taste of chamomile tea offered afterward. In 2027, rural broadband improvements allowed live-streamed storytelling sessions, where elders described the meth epidemic under soft lamplight, microphones capturing the rustle of denim sleeves. They shared sensory details, the sting of anhydrous ammonia, the sweetness of corn mash. Roland's sister read aloud from his hospital letters, the paper smelling of old glue, detailing how the job once felt like armor against debt. Viewers typed comments tasting of midnight snacks, the communal experience bridging time. The measurement motif resurfaced as she held up the archival log, reciting the 17.4 microgram figure slowly, voice trembling. Silence in this setting derived from respect. Chat windows paused, letting the number resonate. The horrifying fate remained central, yet the tone stayed gentle, ASMR-like, aligning with the channel's style. Myth and reality braided, but evidence held firm. The sand remembers streamed whispers, routers blink, the hollow waits in pixelated dusk. Educational curricula in 2028 incorporated modules on rural addiction history, and classrooms smelled of dry erase markers while students handled replica forensic tools, UV flashlights, latex gloves, small scales. Teachers narrated Jarvis's story with measured calm, emphasizing the job's perceived value, temporary relief from chronic toil, and the catastrophic cost. Students tasted commissary-style snacks during discussions, connecting sensory experience to empathy. Assignments asked them to compare the ghost myth with the data, ensuring the central motif persisted. Silence was discouraged, participation graded gently. Discovery of truth became a classroom ritual, rediscovery for each new cohort. The measurement on beam C7 functioned as a thesis statement for the unit, its numbers memorized like dates in the revolution. The horrifying fate thus educates, preventing repetition by grounding myth in evidence. Policy analysts in 2029 evaluated meth's economic impact, using models that quantified lost productivity down to minutes, spreadsheets smelling metaphorically of cold circuitry. They referenced Jarvis's case to humanize the numbers, noting his inability to return to welding, the loss of skilled labor. Their reports list valuations: 1.2 million lifetime earnings forfeited, 600,000 in medical expenditures, each figure echoing the residue measurement. They explained how the job once generated revenue, yet drained public resources, a balance sheet soaked in chemical odors. Presentations occurred in conference rooms where the air tasted recycled. Attendees scribbled notes on smooth paper. Silence afterwards came from analytical shock, participants absorbing how a single explosion mirrors statewide costs. The analysts recommended investment in vocational retraining, aligning with the narrative's emphasis on meaningful work. The sand remembers calculators clicks, HVAC sighs, the hollow weights within policy briefs. Family therapists in 2030 greeted clients in offices scented with lavender diffusers, inviting Jarvis's grandchildren to process inherited trauma. Sessions involved tactile exercises, kneading clay, the coolness grounding them as they discussed family legends of blue light. Therapists gently corrected myths, referencing the measurement log displayed on a small tablet, integrating fact into healing. The job of therapy created value by transforming silence into communication, breaking suppression motivated by shame. Children described the metallic taste of fear when passing the old homestead, a visceral clue to intergenerational impact. Therapists guided them to imagine alternative rituals, gardening, storytelling infused with positive sensory anchors. The horrifying fate thus catalyzed new traditions, softening its shadow through evidence-based compassion. Gene therapy researchers curious about burn recovery analyzed Jarvis's preserved tissue samples in 2031, the lab smelling of ethanol and humming freezers. They measured collagen density, recorded micrographs of scar fibers shimmering under polarized light. Their findings may improve future treatments, deriving value from tragedy. They acknowledged Jarvis in publications, noting the ethical weight of using his tissue. The job of research requires confronting painful histories, and the scientists inserted a sentence about the archival residue measurement to situate their work in the broader narrative. Silence among the team occurred out of reverence when they handled the samples, a solemn hush broken only by instrument beeps. The myth of ghostly flames seems distant here, yet even these scholars read about the legend to understand cultural context. The sand remembers centrifuge whirs, data cascades, the hollow weights in sterile cold. In 2032, virtual reality reconstructions allowed people worldwide to walk through a simulated version of the Jarvis farmhouse. Users felt haptic feedback mimicking rough floorboards, smelled synthesized solvent odors, and heard the low rumble of distant trains. The experience juxtaposed two overlays, one labeled Legend, casting blue spectral light, and another labeled Evidence, highlighting measured residues with floating data. Participants toggled between them, experiencing the collision of myth and measurement viscerally. The job of VR designers created empathy by engaging senses, letting users feel the heavy heat before the explosion. Silence in the simulation came from design, moments where sound dimmed, giving space to absorb the horror. Feedback surveys tasted of chai or coffee sipped during sessions, intangible yet real. The horrifying fate thus educates globally, gentle narration guiding visitors. Town planners in 2033 redeveloped the lot where the farmhouse once stood, installing a community garden where soil now smelled of tomato vines and basil, thanks to years of remediation. They embedded a small plaque displaying the residue measurement and a QR code linking to this layered history. Gardeners, hands gritty with loam, tended raised beds, turning the job of cultivation into a reparative ritual. Children tasted cherry tomatoes under sunlit afternoons, a sensory counterpoint to chemical bitterness. Silence here stems from awe. Visitors often pause, breathing in earthy perfume, contemplating transformation. The myth of ghostlight persists playfully among kids chasing fireflies, yet parents gently explain the real story. Discovery, suppression, rediscovery conclude in a loop that seeds hope. The sand remembers trowels scraping, bees murmur, the hollow waits beneath fertile rows. Seasonal storytellers in 2034 gather by the garden's pergola at twilight, string lights casting warm halos, the air perfumed with crushed mint. They speak softly, ASMR cadence lingering on syllables, retelling Jarvis's journey with factual anchors, dates, dosages, measurements. They invite listeners to close their eyes, imagine the texture of charred wood, the taste of hospital ice, the smell of solvent shifting into soil's musk. Rhetorical questions are rare, perhaps a single, what weight of residue will we leave for future hands? The job of storytelling now creates communal ritual aligned with healing. Silence arises between phrases, a reverent pause acknowledging lives altered. The horrifying fate remains central, yet the tone is gentle, immersive, bedtime friendly. Legends fade into respectful metaphors while the beam's numbers glow steadily. Environmental monitors continue to test the garden yearly, 2035 readings showing meth levels below detection, the report smelling of fresh ink. Volunteers celebrate with herbal tea tasting of chamomile and honey, toasting under starlight. They keep the measurement plaque polished, fingers feeling the engraved digits. The job of stewardship offers ongoing value, a ritual of vigilance ensuring the past does not seep back unseen. Silence now is peaceful, motivated by contentment rather than fear. The myth of ghostlight transforms into a story about resilience, told to lull restless minds. Chemical reality remains recorded, ready to confront any resurgence. The sand remembers laughter now, nightjars trill, the hollow waits with softened edges. In 2036, an oral history project released a final compilation titled Blue Light, Measured Truth, layering Jarvis's voice, archival data, and community reflections. The book smells of ink and recycled paper, waiting hands with 2.1 pounds of carefully chosen words. Each chapter reaffirms the central motif. Measurement stands firm, myth drifts like fog. Contributors describe tactile experiences, stiff hospital sheets, crumbly plaster, the smooth curve of the cedar chest, ensuring sensory anchors persist. They document every motivation for silence encountered: economic protection, accident shame, reverence, legal caution, awe, compassion, fatigue, strategic fear. The job of compilation offers power by preserving nuance. The horrifying fate becomes a gently told caution, suitable for bedtime yet unwavering in truth. Readers close the book hearing soft train whistles, tasting peppermint tea, inhaling cedar-scented memory. Roland Jarvis's memory settles in the evening air. A man who believed a ritual of chemistry could balance accounts, who wore the scent of solvents like armor, who measured success in cash folded into work boots. His horrifying fate glows in the archive beam's residue numbers and in the mythic halo townsfolk once preferred. Tonight, as crickets rasp and porch lights halo insects in amber rings, the mystery remains open. In what unseen registers do communities weigh desperation against survival, and who now listens closely enough to hear residues whisper? Even now, the archive room where Beam C7 rests keeps its climate at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 45%, compressors humming like bees under glass, an exactness confirmed on monthly maintenance logs clipped with brass. The archivist opens a drawer and lifts a cloth-bound ledger from 1883 describing patent medicine sales along the Cedar River, the paper thin as dried leaves, perfumed with ginger and wintergreen oils that seeped through the ink more than a century ago. Names of farmers, including an ancestor of Jarvis, cluster beside quantities: 12 ounces of Hale's invigorating syrup, 10 of Dr. River, Bissell's nerve lightening. Each entry estimates dosages in minims, careful columns predating metric habits, yet the craving for chemically sustained stamina already speaks from the cursive loops. The ledger trembles faintly in her gloved palms when a passing freight train sends vibrations through the building, reminding that tracks still define the town's heartbeat. She notes the smell of warm brass from the radiators, the way dust motes drift through the steadied air like soft snow. And she files the ledger beside the beam because stories that seem distant in time share the same undertow. Late 19th century farm diaries from nearby Sumner add another layer, describing stimulant-laced coca wines poured in tin cups before long, ploughing days, the liquid-staining notebooks with reddish halos that still smell faintly of tannin when moistened with humidity. A diary dated May 17, 1892, records a mixing ritual: 3 fingers of Vin Mariani stirred with honey until syrup sharp. The writer notes a buzzing clarity, thumbprints smudging the page as if the ink softened under the heat of his labor-hardened hand. These small rituals mirror the sensations Jarvis would chase: a burn on the tongue, the awakening of muscles, the belief that chemistry could coax light into a weary body. The archivists measure the diary's dimensions, 4.5 by 6.75 inches, and log mildew presence at 1.2% coverage, a detail meant for conservation, but also a metaphor for how stimulant culture seeped quietly into rural routines. The diaries whisper in the same soft cadence as the modern ASMR narration, letting the past murmur without haste. The gentle voice guiding listeners through these records lingers over early 20th century seed catalogues that offered stamina salts as free premiums with corn orders, each packet weighed at a quarter ounce and laced with ephedra. When opened today, the paper crackles and releases a ghostly citrus scent, drying the tongue. A 1911 catalogue from the Minneapolis Seed Company includes a testimonial from R.J. of Olwine, praising the salts for keeping him awake through a double harvest. The initials match Roland's grandfather. The repetition across generations feels like a soft pulse beneath the narrative. Families binding themselves to fields and machinery through substances that promised wakefulness. Archivists note the printer's mark, the smeared cobalt ink that still glitters under angled light, and they place a humidity monitor beside the stack, its digital numbers ticking upward with each visitor's breath. The sound is a steady tick, like a pocket watch, coaxing listeners into that drowsy, attentive state where details settle gently. Fast forward to 1933, a year when the Civilian Conservation Corps encampment near Backbone Lake issued benzodrine tablets at dawn, recorded in quartermaster sheets that smell of wool blankets and damp canvas. The sheets list distribution quantities: 4 tablets per crew leader, 2 for assistants, measured in milligrams and tracked to prevent misuse. Yet oral histories collected in the 1970s recount how those tablets dissolved into shared coffee, the bitterness masked by camp sugar, keeping men alert while clearing tornado-felled trees. That habit followed them home after the program ended, threads of usage weaving into rural life. The gentle voice of this narrative describes the taste of that camp coffee, metallic from tin mugs, sweet from condensed milk, echoing through decades until Roland's own thermos held similar bitterness during Iowa winters. It is not judgment, but soft observation, acknowledging how survival practices travel quietly, becoming family customs. By 1957, the meatpacking plant where Roland would later work hosted wellness seminars, handing out sample inhalers smelling of camphor and menthol. Attendance sheets stored in a corrugated box document, number WP57112, list each worker's pulse before and after use. Numbers penciled with engineer precision: 68 becomes 84, 71 becomes 93. The plant nurse described the inhaler's cold bite as fresh snow at dawn in her typed report, now yellowed, edges curling like dried petals. Roland's mother, then a line worker, attended one session and tucked the inhaler into her purse, the scent mingling with powder compacts and the leather's rich musk. Years later, she would set that inhaler on a kitchen shelf, a relic of sanctioned relief, unaware of the path it suggested. The narrative lingers on her kitchen's soundtrack, radio polka tunes with accordion sighs, the rattle of enamel pans, immersion designed to lull while the horror of eventual outcomes seeps in by degrees. Through the 1960s, long-haul trucking logs display the progression from authorized amphetamine use to clandestine availability. A logbook dated August 14, 1968, recovered from a truck stop dumpster outside Independence, lists rest breaks, fuel consumption, and, in the margin, dosage notes: Black Beauties X2, Year 915, Cross Tops X1, 1354. The paper smells of diesel and sweat, corners stiff with road grime. Investigators catalogued the book in 1999, measuring trace amphetamine at 0.8 micrograms per square centimetre on the cover, proof that the chemicals lingered even after decades. The gentle retelling evokes the hum of truck engines idling under sodium lights, cab interiors glowing with pale dashboards, drivers chewing gritty coffee grounds to stay awake. Roland heard stories of those helpers from uncles who drove cattle haulers. The tales became lullabies of endurance sung over gravy-drenched potatoes at family suppers. Chemistry sang softly alongside prairie wind, normalized by necessity. When the 1979 farm reports indicated commodity prices collapsing, local extension agents held meetings in cafeterias smelling of yeast rolls and chalk dust, handing out brochures printed on glossy stock slick beneath fingertips. One brochure titled "Maximizing Alertness During Harvest" recommended over-the-counter stimulants, quoting efficiency gains up to 12%. The charts used precise axes, the curves ascending like promise. Roland attended as a teenager, tracing the lines, feeling the paper's cool sheen, absorbing the notion that chemistry equaled productivity. The gentle voice explains how the chairs creaked, how the fluorescent lights flickered in a rhythm almost like breathing, soothing the room even as the information pushed bodies toward dangerous thresholds. No one mentioned the resilience cost of sleeplessness, the micro tears in muscle, the frayed nerves. The data felt authoritative, and in rural communities, authority often calms more than it alarms. The early 1980s introduced catalogues of portable anhydrous ammonia tanks, their slick covers smelling faintly of machine oil. Item AM42 promised efficient nitrogen delivery. Capacity 42 gallons, weight 96 pounds empty. These numbers later mirrored methanol recipes scribbled in Jarvis's notebooks. Agricultural equipment auctions noted hammer prices for tanks, recorded on carbon copy slips that bruise easily under touch. At 1/1983 auction, Jarvis's father purchased 2 surplus tanks for $120. The auctioneer's chant echoing through a barn perfumed with hay and gasoline. Years later, Roland would inherit those tanks, the metal still cold under his palms even in July heat. The narrative's gentle cadence describes how his fingers traced serial numbers, the digits stamped crisp, while his mind translated farm equipment into chemical apparatus. Economic pressure drives such repurposing, the voice whispers, letting listeners consider how tools shift roles when livelihoods erode. Case files from 1988 document early clandestine lab raids in Fayette County. A sheriff's report, pages clipped with a rusting binder clip, lists seized items: mason jars, coffee filters, Red Devil lye, lithium batteries. Each item includes mass and condition, measured to the gram, noted with the steady pen of a deputy who also milked cows before dawn. The paperwork smells faintly of barn straw and copier toner. The gentle narration recounts the deputy's statement about entering a kitchen fogged with chemical vinegar, a radio playing Willie Nelson quietly, a child's drawing curling on the fridge magneted by a 4-H ribbon. Scenes like this planted seeds in Roland's mind about both danger and possibility. He read the newspaper article while delivering hay bales, hands nicked, sweat tasting briny. The horror of the chemical burns described did not outweigh the pull of quick cash, because the numbers, income versus debt, did not balance any other way. During the 1991 Gulf War, military supply chains once again normalized stimulant distribution, this time in blister packs with desert camouflage branding. Returned National Guard members, including Roland's cousin, brought home leftover packs smelling of plastic and adhesive. Pharmacists noted a spike in requests for stay-awake solutions, their ledgers recording sale counts, each entry initialed. The drugstore's polished tile floor reflected fluorescent light like a calm pond, footsteps soft. Roland watched his cousin crush a tablet into cola, the fizz releasing a sweet chemical aroma. The cousin described night shifts on base, eyes wide even as fatigue dragged. Stories like these softened Roland's resistance, teaching that chemistry kept soldiers safe, so why not keep farmers solvent? The gentle voice guides listeners through those justifications, never rushing, letting them feel the cool glass of the soda bottle, hear the whispering air conditioning vents. By 1993, Iowa State University Extension newsletters warned of meth labs moving from urban to rural spaces, citing seizure statistics, 142 labs statewide, 37% in counties with populations under 20,000. The newsletter paper is coarse, fibers rough against fingertips, ink absorbing moisture from humid summer air. The article includes sensory descriptions from emergency responders, the smell of burned cat litter, the taste of copper, the way eyes watered under ammonia cloud. Roland clipped the article, sliding it into a shoebox with tax receipts. The box now resides in the archive, smelling of leather boots and earth. The narrative touches on this moment delicately, noting how he also kept a photo of his smiling children in the same box, a juxtaposition that still warms with the faded scent of photo emulsion and pencil shavings. Choices condense in such small spaces. Late-night AM radio in 1995 carried call-in shows where rural listeners discussed smurfing. Pseudoephedrine, the host's voice a soothing baritone, static hissing like soft rain. Transcripts printed on thermal paper, now turning sepia, list call times, area codes, paraphrased advice. One caller from Unwind described rotating drugstore visits to avoid suspicion, the script noting the squeak of his old truck bench seat as background noise. Roland heard these broadcasts while soldering a broken hydraulic hose, the smell of flux filling his workshop. He absorbed the social engineering tips like he once absorbed weather reports, practical knowledge whispered after midnight. The horror remained invisible. What mattered were the mechanics of staying afloat. The narrative's tone wraps these nights in gentle darkness. The radio glow dim, the hum of machinery cozy, even as the path toward the explosion tightened. In 1997, a cooperative grain elevator closed, and the state's unemployment office recorded 106 displaced workers, including Roland's neighbour, data preserved on microfiche smelling faintly of vinegar. The unemployment forms required applicants to list chemical exposures from previous employment, a detail that seems prophetic now. Roland marked ammonia fumes from fertilizer, the letters printed carefully. That same year, the county hospital logged a rise in emergency visits for chemical eye irritation, 23 cases compared to 11 the year before, numbers circled in red pen. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and lingering cafeteria soup, the chair's vinyl cool. Roland accompanied a friend to such a visit, sitting quietly while nurses flushed the friend's eyes, the saline splashing like distant surf. The narrative speaks softly about these moments, because they demonstrate how communities acclimate to chemical risk incrementally, each incident normalizing the next. Jarvis's meticulous notebooks from 2002 show his transformation from user to cook. Graph paper pages bear hand-drawn reaction diagrams, pencil lines smudged by calloused fingertips. He recorded yields in grams, 38.6, 42.4, 51.7. He noted pH readings, scribbling ideal 6.5 beside the step where lithium strips fizzled. The pages smell of acetone and cigar smoke, the corners curled. One entry lists his budget, propane 14, pseudoephedrine 114, pseudoephedrine 2000. Lithium batteries 30, expected revenue 800. Each number speaks to the job's grip, the promise of profit. The gentle narration describes his desk lamp casting a warm pool of light over the pages, moths tapping the shade, the house otherwise silent except for owl calls outside. This is where the horror took root, yet the moment feels tender, because he believed he was crafting stability for his family, chasing the same security his ancestors sought through cocotonics and benzodrine tablets. The months leading up to the explosion are captured in the sensory log he kept on a legal pad, a habit suggested by a counselor during a brief attempt at treatment. He noted physical feelings: hands tremor like corn leaves in wind, tongue tastes pennies, smell of fuel clings to pillow. He scored his pain on a 10-point scale, most days a 6, some days a 9. The legal pad paper is coarse, the ink bleeding slightly where the pen pressed hard. The ink bleeding slightly where the pen pressed hardest. The gentle voice lingering in this narrative reads his words slowly, honoring the self-awareness he struggled to maintain. He wrote about the quiet thrill when a batch crystallized, comparing the sparkle to frost on fence wires at dawn, a rural image turning toxic. The legal pad rests beside beam C7 in the archive, the pencil scent still faint, reminding visitors that his horrifying fate unfolded in increments, not lightning bolts. After the explosion, hospital staff collected swabs from his skin grafts to monitor contamination, each swab stored in sterile envelopes marked with time and temperature. A lab report dated September 20, 2005, lists residual methamphetamine at 0.004 micrograms per gram of tissue, a testament to how thoroughly the chemical had permeated his body. The report paper is glossy, the ink crisp, faintly smelling of ethanol from lab handling. Nurses described the burn unit's soundscape: pump alarms chiming gently, filtered air whooshing, lullaby music playing from a donated CD player. The gentle voice here softens even more, conveying the texture of healing creams, cool, slick, tinged with lanolin, that staff smoothed over grafts. They measured fluid output from his chest tubes, 350 milliliters by midnight, jotting the numbers on clipboards that clacked softly when hung at shift change. Data provided comfort to staff, even as Jarvis drifted between agitation and sedation, eyes glassy, lips cracked. The rehabilitation center where he relearned basic motions smells of plywood and hope. Therapy logs note his progress: left arm lift to 45 degrees, right knee flex to 30, standing tolerance 12 minutes. Therapists counted repetitions softly, voices almost hypnotic, coaxing muscles to obey. They wrapped his hands in silicone-lined gloves, the texture smooth, warming to skin, preventing contractures. Roland described phantom sensations as phantom sparks, a term therapists recorded in quotes. The gentle narration details the therapy room: sunlight filtered through blinds, dust specks swirling like tiny galaxies, the steady tick of a metronome used to pace exercises. Each step forward was measured, each measurement a quiet applause that held back the tide of despair. Yet the horror remained within reach whenever a flashback struck, the smell of propane seeping into his dreams. Once home, he received visits from public health nurses documenting contamination cleanup. Their clipboards list surface readings taken with ion mobility spectrometers: kitchen counter, number 23 micrograms per square centimeter, living room sofa 0.23 micrograms per square centimeter. They recorded ambient temperature, humidity, chemical smell intensity on a 1/5 scale. The house, despite repairs, retained hints of char and solvent, mingled with bleach from repeated scrubbing. Nurses wore Tyvek suits that rustled like autumn leaves, their face shields fogging slightly when they leaned close to speak kindly. The gentle voice describes how they brewed chamomile tea in a microwave that still bore heat scars, offering him a cup scented with honey to mask the chemical tang. Measurements guided cleanup, yet the home never felt safe again. The distress etched even into the grain of door frames. Community college students researching the explosion in 2007 created a sensory map of Allwine, marking where chemical smells lingered, where train whistles echoed, where air felt heavy. They measured decibel levels near the Jarvis property 60 dB when freight trains passed, 48 at rest. They recorded soil pH, water hardness, air particulate counts. Their map, printed on matte poster board, features hand-drawn icons of soybeans, barns, factory stacks. The poster smells of marker ink and youthful optimism. The gentle narrative describes how they presented their findings in a dim auditorium, stage lights warm on their faces, while townspeople sat on folding chairs padded with thin foam. Roland, bandaged hands cradled in his lap, listened, nodding when they spoke of environmental burdens. The horror of his experience seeded community science, giving students purpose, teaching them to quantify the intangible. Jarvis's death certificate in 2010 prompted a chain of tributes recorded with the same meticulousness. Funeral home attendance logs count 73 visitors, each signature trailing the faint fragrance of lilies filling the chapel. A cousin crafted a memory board measuring 36 by 24 inches, displaying photos under protective acetate sheets that smell of plastic and cologne. The obituary notebook, passed among guests, contains notes describing him as steady-eyed, soft-spoken, smelling of cedar shavings. The gentle narration dwells on the service's sensory palate. The organ's low swell, the wooden pews polish oil, the taste of ham sandwiches served afterwards in the fellowship hall. People shared stories of his pre-meth kindness, his post-burn resilience. The horrifying fate coloured every recollection, yet compassion softened the edges. Numbers remained in the background, invisible yet present, like the heartbeats of listeners dozing off to this quiet retelling. In 2011, state archivists launched a travelling exhibit using Jarvis's story as centrepiece. They loaned Beam C7, transporting it in a foam-lined crate weighed at 28.4 pounds with packaging, tracked via barcode scanners. At each host town, they logged ambient scent descriptions, sometimes popcorn from adjacent movie houses, sometimes sawdust from civic centres doubling as craft shows. Visitors pressed palms near the beam without touching, feeling the chill radiating, smelling faint soot. Docents guided them in whisper tones, inviting them to imagine the kitchen before and after. A feedback journal gathers entries written with slow strokes, the pen's ink smelling of berries. People note their own brush with addiction, their own memories of chemical smells in childhood homes. The gentle narrative mentions the weight of the journal, how turning pages sounds like someone turning in sleep. The exhibit's measured details provide structure within the emotional tide. Environmental remediation continued, and by 2014 the Department of Natural Resources logged groundwater tests from a monitoring well on Jarvis's property. Sample 1407 measured 0.26 micrograms methamphetamine per litre, down from 0.241 2 years prior. The report includes conductivity readings, dissolved oxygen levels, water temperature at 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The sealed vials emitted a faint mineral scent when opened, tinged with something sweet, metallic. Scientists accompanied their data with notes about cottontail rabbit tracks observed nearby, tufted ears catching morning light. The gentle narration lingers on that image, wildlife reclaiming space, paws pressing damp soil, noses twitching. Measurement and nature coexist, the horror diluted by time yet not erased. Roland's story thus shapes even ecological monitoring, ensuring the land's healing remains quantified and cherished. Historians in 2016 interviewed pharmacists who had sold cold medicine during the peak of smurfing. Their dispensary logs list daily purchase totals, column after column of numbers lined up like fence posts. One pharmacist, now retired, recalled the tactile sensation of blister packs sliding under his fingers, the faint medicinal smell that clung to his lab coat. He marked suspicious sales with a yellow highlighter, pages still bright. The gentle narrative transcribes his voice, soft and worn, as he describes the guilt of suspecting yet needing customers. He remembers Roland as polite, hat in hand, paying cash that smelled faintly of oil and hay. The horror is that kindness cannot reveal chemical ambitions. Measurement, again, served as the only impartial witness. Purchase limits, inventory audits, law enforcement reports, By 2018, the Unwind Historical Society hosted nighttime listening sessions where elders shared memories over speakers that emitted a warm analog crackle. They measured attendance with click counters, 63 one night, 77 the next. The room smelled of lemon bars and burned coffee, tablecloths plastic slick. Roland's mother, voice quivering, described the sensation of holding his bandaged hand, the gauze rough, the antiseptic smell now associated with lullabies. The gentle narration captures the hush when she mentioned the beam measurement, how the number 17.4 became a mantra for truth. These sessions ended with community members stepping outside into night air smelling of cut alfalfa, stars bright, insects droning softly. The horror of meth's grip felt distant in those moments, yet the data anchored memory, preventing romanticized blur. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 temporarily closed the archive, and staff monitored temperature and humidity remotely. Sensors transmitted readings, temperature never exceeding 69 degrees, relative humidity stable at 47%. Beam C7 sat in darkness, the room smelling faintly of closed books and static. Archivists recorded their absence in a digital log, noting the loneliness they felt away from the collections, the silence in their small homes filled with sourdough attempts and hand sanitizer. The gentle narrative reflects on this pause. The world slowed, yet Roland's story hummed in their minds like a bedtime melody, reminding them that disasters overlap, each leaving residues to measure and understand. When they returned, the archive's air held a subtle must, soon dispersed by filtration. Dust levels measured 12 micrograms per cubic meter within safe bounds. Precision persisted even amid global uncertainty. In 2021, a grant-funded audio restoration of Roland's one surviving interview. Engineers measured frequency ranges, noise floors, harmonic distortion, using software whose interface glowed midnight blue. The studio smelled of warmed electronics and coffee. They smoothed his rasping voice, not to erase pain, but to make it more audible. He described the tactile sensation of peeling burned skin like wet parchment, a phrase that stills listeners. The gentle narration plays a faint excerpt beneath words, aligning breath with his cadence, letting the horror arrive softly. They logged the file size, 113 megabytes, and stored backups in 3 locations, safeguarding against loss. Data protects memory, the way insulation protects tender seedlings. Agricultural economists in 2022 modeled the cost of meth-related crop losses due to abandoned fields, using satellite imagery that smelled of nothing, yet glowed vivid on monitors. Their model estimated 2,340 acres statewide left fallow after lab busts, soil contaminated beyond immediate use. They converted acreage into bushels lost, dollars unrealized, families displaced. Roland's property accounted for 7 acres in their dataset, file number AGR22778. The gentle narrative describes the satellite images, squares of muted brown amid green, the edges feathered, the texture almost like quilt fabric. Economists presented their findings via webinar, voices filtered through compressed audio, measured in kilobits per second. Listeners in farmhouses sipped coffee that tasted of softened well water, absorbing numbers that validated the intangible sense of depletion they already felt. The 2023 soil tests introducing switchgrass remediation recorded plant height at 38 inches mid-season, biomass 1.8 tons per acre. Botanists noted the scent of crushed switchgrass, sweet, almost vanilla, and the roughness of leaves against wrists. They documented insect species returning, monarch caterpillars, lady beetles. The gentle narrative paints this with soft brushstrokes, inviting listeners to imagine the rustle of tall grass in evening breeze, the crickets accompanying. Measurements turned hopeful, quantifying recovery rather than ruin. Yet the horror remains remembered through plaques, through the nightly ASMR retellings that keep his name spoken. In 2024, digital humanities scholars created a timeline juxtaposing world events with moments in Roland's life. They assigned colors to themes, economy, health, policy, legend. Each entry includes date, location, measurement if available. The timeline interface produces a faint electronic hum. The screen's light cool on viewing fingers. Users scroll gently, reading about 1944 stimulant shipments alongside 2005 explosion reports, sensing the continuity. The gentle narration references this timeline in hushed tones, inviting listeners to imagine fingertips gliding over smooth glass, the tactile contrast to the beam's rough char. The horror stands organized yet still capable of stirring tears in midnight watches. Looking ahead, 2027 projections for rural health intervention budgets allocate $3.6 million to stimulant addiction services, with $20,000 earmarked for Fayette County. Budget sheets smell of fresh paper, the ink still tacky. The gentle narrative explains the figures without haste, describing how counselors plan to spend funds on mindfulness programs held in barns converted to community spaces, their air scented by hay and lavender sachets. Participants will sit on wool blankets, hands warmed by mugs of herbal infusion, practicing breathwork while hearing Roland's story as cautionary meditation. Measurements will track attendance, relapse rates, satisfaction scores. The horror of his fate thus seeds compassionate structures for future resilience. By 2029, genealogists hope to deliver a comprehensive Jarvis family archive to his grandchildren, binding scanned images into a printed volume weighing 4.3 pounds. The mock-up paper is thick, textured like watercolor stock, smelling faintly of linen. The gentle narrative imagines the grandchildren turning pages, fingertips brushing embossed dates, reading sensory descriptions of ancestors' lives, the creak of wagon wheels, the taste of fresh cream, the chill of barn mornings. Roland's chapter includes the beam measurement, burn statistics, but also small joys. His laughter described as low and rolling, his fondness for cinnamon toast. Horror and humanity sit together, balanced like the counterweights of an old scale. As the decades progress, sensors embedded in the community garden soil transmit data every spring: moisture at 32%, nitrogen at 18 parts per million, pH steady at 6.7. The garden smells of damp earth, basil, tomatoes. Children measure plant growth with fabric tapes, numbers bright, hands dirty. They know Roland's name because teachers share it gently, aligning it with lessons on chemistry's power and peril. The gentle narrative invites listeners to picture twilight gatherings there, fireflies blinking, elders humming, lullabies that weave caution with comfort. Horror diminishes but does not vanish. It becomes part of the town's bedtime story, told with care. In the ever-present archive, beam C7 remains lifted on foam blocks, weight unchanged, residue sealed in its grain. Decade by decade, visitors approach, ears filled with the soft narration that guides them through context. They inhale the faint smoky tang, feel the coolness radiating, hear the whisper of HVAC. Some trace the air above the char, as if outlining a phantom flame, hearts slowing in the museum's hush. Volunteers log visit counts, 1,024 this year so far, each entry initialed. Measurement continues to anchor truth, while myths fade to gentle metaphors about resilience. Roland's horrifying fate stands both as warning and as impetus for tenderness, a paradox the community embraces with slow breathing and steady hands. The narrative closes each night with gratitude for attentive listeners, for those who let the details settle like dust motes in lamplight, for those who lean close enough to hear residues whisper